Thank you, good people, for your thoughts and non-prayers. We are back for another episode of The Nonprofits. Welcome, YouTube land. This show is a product of the ACA, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to the separation of religion and government and promoting positive atheism. We are so happy to have another guest host with us, Mr. Christy Powell. Thank you so much for joining us of Sexuality. How are you?
Hey, thank y'all so much for having me on. It's my first time doing like this new, updated, super modern version of the show. Super exciting.
Yes, that's right. You are our previous guest on doing the nonprofits in the olden days. How
Yeah,
far
my
ago was that? Yeah.
yeah, my very first appearance with the ACA was, hey, we're doing this show, Secular Sexuality. Come on by the studio, we'll talk about it. And then, like 5 minutes before Nonprofits was supposed to shoot, they were like, why don't you just go ahead and sit in this chair? And yeah, they threw me right into it. Nobody was prepared, least of all me. Next thing I know, I'm spilling my guts about my own deconversion story in front of a live audience, and kind of changed my life in way more ways than I think I realized at the time.
Wow, that is cool. So you just became Insta host, and now here you are, host with your co-host on occasion, Vila Bianca, on Secular Sexuality. I had the pleasure of being on there, and unfortunately, it was during that time where Texas was going through that crazy weather and power outage. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to be on it with you and V, but I do very much appreciate being on there. And thank you so much for joining us for this episode.
Yeah, super
Really
excited to be
appreciate it.
here.
Great. And of course, we welcome back Arden and Mikey with us. Thank you, ma'am, sir. How are you both been doing?
Doing pretty good.
Ma'am, I'm sorry. Yes, that's good. I'm glad we can, spin this conversation again, just diving into the various topics that we want to talk about. First and foremost, this has been recorded on Wednesday, which is March 31st, which is Trans Day of Visibility. So happy Trans Day of Visibility to all you folks out there. And also to mention, it is Cesar Chavez Day too. So there's a little adage to that. I kind of Googled that. But anyway, let's continue on. But before we get started, we haven't already done so. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you can be alerted when our weekly Sunday premieres do occur right after right after Talk Heathen, but before AXP. So go ahead and like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can get alerted. If you haven't already done so, please support us on Patreon at patreon.com/thenonprofits. And feel free to join us in our fan social media outlets. We do have a fan-based Discord at the tiny.cc/ACA Discord. And we also have a Facebook friend group and a Twitter, which I'm sure we'll link that Twitter handle in the description down below too. So you can definitely follow us there. But of course, our Facebook group.com/group/nonprofits live. You can always find us there as well. If you have any comments, want to suggest any topics, have any letters, anything you want to say to us, you can email us too. That is going to be at nonprofits@atheist-community.org. So let's just dive on in. I wanted to kick this off a little bit, kind of discussing some international news. And it's going to be centered around this article from the NBC News that I found in regards to teaching masculinity to young boys in China. Now, this is I won't say oddly interesting, but this is interesting just given the change in legislation and climate in China in the last few years, especially with President Xi Jinping having that lifetime appointment of being a president, and in regards to just having a damper down on controlling the type of media that's being flooded in their outlets, just, really taking control of what is being put out to their population. This most recent development that they're doing, they plan, or at least in regards to China's education ministry, to quote unquote cultivate masculinity in boys starting from kindergarten all the way to high school. So they're really reaching out to trying to hone in on young boys and to say, no, acting like a girl is bad, apparently. So definitely, reaching out to those old school kind of gender norm behaviors. I don't know. It's just fascinating to see how this type of thing, and obviously the type of toxic harm it imposes, not only physically due to bullying issues, but psychologically as well. I don't know if any viewpoints on that, just as far as just why in this present moment is this occurring, given then everything else in the media today. It's heavy, I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think as you were pointing out, the government in China has been getting increasingly, autocratic, a lot more authoritarian. It's pretty intimidating. So I think, historically, we've seen a lot of this kind of stuff with countries heading that direction. Misogyny and patriarchy affects boys too. And this is one way that we see that making a very strict code of what it means to be a man, and humans biologically were hardwired to want to fear being locked out of the in-group. So it's a really easy way to control behavior when you, create this kind of ideal for masculinity that almost no boys could ever live up to. But it's definitely disheartening. In the article we saw, it was really nice to see that the little boy that they were particularly focusing the story on at the end found a little bit of pride in himself and who he was, and that he was okay with not being a masculine boy. That made me happy that he can at least hold on to that, hopefully forever, but at least for the time being.
Yeah,
and
go ahead, Mike.
And I wrote down a quote which was really crazy to me. Like, it said, boys in China traditionally are expected to show strong leadership skills, get good grades in math and science, and excel in school sports. On what planet does that have to be boy specific? Like, since when is that you have listed things for students. These are for all children who are in school with other kids. They should all want to do these things. And the fact that they say, no, that's the way. So what do you want the girls to do? Just get C's and F's? Like, is that what, and then just like can't hit a wiffle ball? Or like what is the other side of the equation? Why wouldn't you want all of your children to be as competent as possible?
Right. And it's especially interesting how hard hitting they are on and focusing on physical education, PE classes. It gained, as far as what I've seen in numerous articles, I try to fish about this story. They're hard hitting on the fact that they're targeting physical education programs and classes. They're actually vamping up how many they're having within their school year currently. Obviously that is a hindrance on the physical educators that they have, but that's all they've been focusing on. The idea and appeal that physical strength equals man equals masculine. So they're trying to establish this notion that, girls aren't physically fit to do such and such things. Whereas, in their recent studies, since certain laws have changed, there has been some way of, there has been young women, or it has been shown that women have increased their numbers as far as testing and education scores over men in the last few years. So I don't know what exactly they're trying to hone in on.
Yeah.
Welcome back, Christy.
Yeah.
There we go. Oh, yes,
hey,
we have you.
good.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, let's hear from Christy now that we have him back.
Yeah, right.
No, we were just bridging off of just the recent news in China, just to kind of catch up. And Mikey made a great point in referencing the idea that they're trying to say that on what basis, I'm trying to kind of paraphrase what Mikey said, on what basis is
I could say it again.
That, please.
Okay. The quote from the article was, boys in China traditionally are expected to show strong leadership skills, get good grades in math and science, and excel in school sports. And I was like, why is that not a good thing for all kids? Like, why does that have to be the boy thing?
Yeah, no, that's a fair point and a really confounding piece of all of this. This is a nation that is known for censorship, and that's definitely not a new idea here. But a lot of that censorship has traditionally been around religion and around a lot of these other like outside influences, with the idea that they could somehow build a perfect society on their own by keeping it like pure, keeping it full of Chinese ideas. And so to see those ideas completely abandon very obvious, very demonstrable science is completely frustrating. I mean, this notion that you can encourage particularly masculine traits by increasing the amount of PE is silly on its face and demonstrably untrue in so many ways. But also trying to force people into these like very specific boxes is just a warmed over notion of conversion therapy, which is dramatically unscientific. And to see them try to apply this unscientific idea with this incredible level of industry, with all of these remarkable scientific tools, and on a scale like this, feels in a lot of ways incredibly unprecedented. And if we weren't talking about actual human beings and human lives, it would almost be an interesting laboratory experiment. But the people that we're experimenting on here are children, and it's devastating to think about the long-term consequences of this idea.
I'm just waiting to see, like, outside of every like executive building, all the sky rises, I'm sure they have like just a bunch of weights. Just a bunch of weights just laying on the ground, and they got like a track, and they got a pull-up bar, because that's how you prove you're a man. They don't. They're all soft and gelatin-like up there, sitting in those sky rises, making tons of money using their brains, whether it's inventing technology or just being in charge of a company. It works fine for them, but now it's like, no. My kid's got to go out there and dig me a 45 by 45 hole and then fill it in again because I told them to. Like, get over it. And I hate to bogart this, but one thing that was crazy to me was the guy was talking about how he was trying to relate to his son, and he wants to use some of these outdoorsy things to bond with him. Dude, I totally get nostalgia. Like, do not bring up Ninja Turtles and me. Like, I love me some Ninja Turtles. But that doesn't mean I'm gonna hate my kid if my kid's like, no, dude, Power Rangers are way better, and I don't want your stupid Ninja Turtles. Like, the kid's demonstrably wrong, but I don't hate them for it. I don't just try to change them because they like something different or they don't enjoy what I loved as a child. Like your broken grandfather raised your broken father, who raised you to be broken, and you're trying to teach the broken to your kid, and your kid's looking at you like, I have a tablet. Like, there's no need for me to be running around chasing squirrels up trees anymore. Like, this is done. Like, can we be done? Can I go back to Fortnite now? Can I Fortnite?
One, as a therapist, I struggle maybe with the word broken, but I have to point out that you're onto something here, because we're not actually increasing any particular like personality traits or anything else. Instead, all we're doing is inducing trauma and basically cutting off pieces of these children. We're telling the folks who are already naturally gravitating towards masculine or whatever particular traits are somehow clustered under that they're okay. And then the other kids, we're just going to go ahead and tell them to shut up. We're going to hurt them. We're going to traumatize them until they are not able to really perform. We saw a much gentler version of this in America in the 90s with the self-esteem movement, when we had this notion that we could like artificially inflate this one aspect of people's personalities. And the truth is, it really didn't go so well. I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but you can draw a lot of pretty straight lines between the rugged individualism and narcissism that America is known for around the world right now. because of this notion that we could somehow go into schools and try to force people into having one particular personality trait that didn't actually line up with who they are or how they saw themselves or their understanding of the world, their natural, otherwise shaped pieces of themselves.
Yeah, Christy, I really liked your comparison earlier of this kind of process to conversion therapy. You know, like one of the reasons that people cite conversion therapy as being, you know, kind of bunk science is because they, time and time again, it doesn't actually change the person. It just causes them to repress those things in a deeply traumatic way.
Exactly.
These traits are, although we might not be able to explain necessarily why or how, they do seem to be innately part of someone, and this attempt to change them is just kicking the can down the road. You know, perhaps you might get some sort of desired behavior out of it in the short term, but exactly, you're going to see those toxic, rugged masculinity that turns into, you know, things like domestic abuse down the road. I mean, I guess I probably shouldn't say that. I'm not citing a specific study, but you know, that's how those things manifest when you're repressing those traits and trying to force yourself into a gendered role that doesn't actually apply to you innately.
Right.
Well,
No,
even-
you're absolutely
even-
hard hitting on that. Go ahead.
And even like with law or with the military, if someone is captured and they would like to get a confession out of them or they want to get something out of them, beating them doesn't work. They will say anything to get you to stop. They will do whatever you want to make the pain go away. So it's not a real change. So, I mean, if you want to make these kids do the pacer until they don't have limp wrists anymore, I don't know that that's a thing that's going to work for you. That's just not going to happen. He's just going to be very tired and he's going to hate you forever.
Right.
Well,
no, it's
forgive
not.
me.
Go for it.
Well, just to say, forgive me if you covered this while I was trying to get my computer to not blow up. But this also just feels like a non-solution in search of a problem that doesn't actually exist. You know, the response here is to the feminization of China, and it is drawn from this idea that China has been humiliated and kept down by other powers for so long. And I hear that collective trauma, but this idea now that Chinese children are somehow more feminine, to me, is just a part of the reality that there are so many more men in China now, and there's a natural diversity among those men. As you broaden the number of men in a society, you're going to see more variation. And so to try and like clamp down on that and try to limit the expression of different types of men that would naturally exist is really missing the point of who these people are.
And it's not like the male population in China is like on the decline, or even not as much versus there being women. I know with a lot of people are familiar with the one-child policy that they had for almost 30 years that just only recently ended within the last 5 or 6 years ago. It was pretty much the art of a program designed to control the size of a rapidly growing population. You know, there was a bunch of conspiracy theories, and whether they be true or not, that, you know, in order to prevent families from having that second child, if they had to choose between a boy or girl, then the girl was killed over the boy. Don't know. That was just, you know, things that have been out there. But the consequence of different variations of births and a lot of female births being under or non-reported has, you know, not surprisingly turned out to be that there are now 37 million more males in China versus there being female. So however they're trying to work out this crisis issue that they're having does not have any ground or foundation in which they're trying to go about this whole new policy and to affect young kids at that.
And to like harpen back on like the grandfather thing, it's like they want their kids to like grow up to be like strong soldiers like grandpa and dad, and so we're at a kind of a time of peace. So
and that's not a bad thing, right?
And that's okay. So if the kid doesn't come out of third grade wanting to beat up everything and just chewing on trees and just a little Tasmanian devil kid, it's okay to have a kid that likes to read and sometimes listens to softer music. Like that's not a problem. That's not a problem.
Yeah. I don't see how it just, And even still, even if that it was a notion of displaying masculinity, of displaying your toughness and fierceness of being a man, you know, bullying incurs, like we have been stating, like many of you have just stated, you know, it only just continues to repress their feelings and how they identify themselves. And you know, a lot of the quotes within various articles, especially the main article that we mentioned, you know, reference, you know, a father that, you know, was, I guess, seemingly okay to whatever the child was listening to, but really wanted to strong arm and pull them away from being effeminate. And you know, that kind of detriment, that kind of harm imposing on them is just, the long-term psychological damage that you instill on these young kids. And obviously it's just focusing on young kids. There's no mention of adults. It's primarily school-age children. Who knows how further along that carries. And a lot of it stems from the history of China, a lot of it stemming from religion, as you just referenced, Christy, and just touching on religion too, just, you know, effects of just being discriminated against and being repressed. Now, you know, in recent news, all of a sudden the Pope is not so much for same-sex, you know, marriages or unions. Then again, I don't think the Pope was ever really for it. But I know, yes, Christy, I know you had a lot to like leading into this.
Yeah. So we are drawing here from an article from the AP. The Vatican bars gay union blessings, and God cannot bless sin. And this is in some ways a non-story because it's like, oh, shock, the Catholic Church doesn't appreciate homosexuality. But
Right.
I think it is worth really drilling down and recognizing how huge of an announcement this is in a lot of ways. The basic ideas here are that same-sex unions can't be blessed by the church because that could somehow be confused with marriage or in some other way the church approving of homosexuality. And for a lot of queer Catholics, this is a sign that Pope Francis is not the ally that they maybe thought he possibly could be. I mean, there was a little bit of grasping at straws there, if I'm being honest, but I know that there are, if there's 1.3 billion Catholics in the world, that there are millions upon millions of queer Catholics that have been clinging onto a little bit of hope. And there's been some reason for that. There's been some softening and a little bit of the rhetoric. And this is just really a slap in the face for a lot of those folks who were holding on. My big thought here is that this is just another evolution of the God virus. You know, secular sexuality is built on the back of The God Virus by Dr. Darrell Ray, which is an incredible book. I recommend everybody check it out. But the basic notion of that book is that religion is a thought virus that will continue to evolve and find new opportunities to infect hosts. And that's really what we see here. Queer Catholics are still being welcomed by the Pope, just not the gay part, right? So it's a little bit of that love the sinner, but hate the sin kind of mentality. And that is by design. That is not a bug in the system. That's actually a feature because it draws people into the church that then now need the church because they're being told by that same church that there's something fundamentally wrong with them. And that just keeps them in a shame spiral, keeps them connected and needing the church in a lot of ways. And it's really heartbreaking to see that that's the direction that things are going.
Yeah, and it's so interesting because with the statement that was put out, it was like a 1 to 2 page statement with the Pope's signature, signing off on this notion that, you know, basically in short terms, we still welcome you, but we won't recognize your union. Sorry, not sorry. So it's almost this like kind of confusing, long, you know, wordy statement to say, we still want you because we don't want to lose out on our Catholic population, but we can't recognize or bless your union in any way, shape, or form. And I'm wondering, like, why even bother? Just solely just so that you can keep the Catholic population that you have. But why even bother making that notion. And I know with some of the priests, Catholic priests, and that had some comments on it, were actually very disheartened, and will see the damage that will be done within their church, even certain countries. For instance, I know, I believe it's Nigeria, that does have a Catholic population, to where there are no anti-gay laws that help to protect people that are still religious but do recognize them are homosexual. But having more of this said and put out there, knowing that their union as a couple will not be blessed, just adds to the fire of them being potentially in harm's way.
Yeah, no, that's very, very true. And I definitely don't mean to monopolize the conversation here, but I think that as atheists, this can come across as sort of a non-story. And it's so important to remember that there are so many people who grew up under Catholicism, that are still in Catholicism, and that have been clinging to hope here. And from the outside, it's hard to know how to feel about it, because there's a very real part of me that's like, good, let them be homophobic assholes. Let the world see that they're homophobic assholes, and that no matter how much they soften their rhetoric or they pretend to invite gays in, that they're not actually inviting those people in. They're inviting their dollars, they're inviting their membership, but they're not inviting the whole person. But I still have to show some concern for the people that are trapped inside of that system. And it's a real challenge, I think, from the outside to know how to feel about this. I was recently approached by a organization here in Austin that was looking for a atheist to sit on their board of directors, to help them in their outreach to queer Christians, to help soften some of the language of Christianity, and to help make sure that their Christian organization wouldn't be considered offensive to atheists or to queer folks, and to have maybe that that desire to connect with other communities. And I like that idea on paper, but I couldn't participate. I didn't want to join in because I didn't want to do anything to further the mission of this ancient and decrepit system of oppression.
Yeah, I think the direction that the church has been going to, as it gets slowly more progressive. You were talking about those adaptations of this kind of thought virus. I think it's a like you were saying, it's hard for us as atheists, I think, to watch this, because I think that's probably a better future for everyone than at least the one we're in now. But this is a problem when you have, a religious structure and a book and a prophet that are supposed to be inerrant and connected to God, where, they want to progress and to make their church welcoming for, LGBT people, but the book does pretty explicitly condemn homosexuality. So how could you ever possibly walk that line, catering to both sides? I don't see how that's possible. And, my heart definitely breaks for the LGBT people who are maybe feeling like they've lost a piece of their community and a piece of themselves in that sense. But I do, in another sense, hope that maybe this drives people to realize that you can find beautiful, loving, and accepting communities that are secular and that don't have to be tied to these institutions.
Yeah,
I just have one small question. Now, can we tax the church?
Yeah.
Like, now can we get their money? Like, will enough people leave that now we can flip the vote? So now we can start taxing these people? Like, you shouldn't you don't get tax exemptions. You don't get no special treatment if you're going to be a bigot. Sorry. You have no right at this point. And now your Pope done messed up and put it on paper. Now you have made yourself out to be a hate group. It is now on paper that you are a hate group. So since you are a hate group, I'm going to need them dollars. I'm going to need them pesos right about now.
I'm going to see those mega churches shrink real quick.
Yeah, Joel Osteen, we're looking at you.
It's just, to add to that, because I was just reflecting on an article I was reading just the other day in regards to Christian universities, and how there's presently a lawsuit against many of the Christian universities here in the US stating, students present and past that have been experiencing, discrimination, violence against them, harm, threat, various things, just harm in general. And the school not doing anything about it. It's in fact written in some of their code of conduct that if you present yourself or act in homosexual favors or ways, that that's punishable by whatever. You can be removed from school, you can be on discipline, whatever the discipline is for university. But I wanted to think about what am I thinking about, like what is that after school thing you do when you're in school?
Detention.
Yeah. Do they have detention at university? No, I was thinking of
I was like, I'm not sharing that with you right now, Jenna. That is none of your business. That is none of your business. I was lonely.
I digress. But yes, these kind of things that, like Mikey said, you're just displaying yourself as being bigots, and yet you're getting away with it without being tax exempt.
Yeah, and it impacts people all over the world. Again, there are some 1.3 billion Catholics on the planet, which is just a shocking idea to me. And in a lot of places, we are talking about the church as not just the only church in town, but as one of the only institutions in town, and really unavoidable. But even here in Austin, Texas, this is influencing people within the church and outside of it. I've got a 12-year-old on the other side of that wall, playing Xbox right now. It would be humiliated if he knew I was talking about him. But this ruling from the Pope is impacting the rhetoric that he hears when he spends time with grandma. And it's impacting the conversations that he and I have. Here I am as a sex therapist having this conversation with you fine people. And I'm also impacted by this ruling in some ways. And it's really heartbreaking to think about. So, whether or not this is going to be like a furthering of the end of Catholicism and eventually, hopefully, lead to some good in that sense, or whether it's just going to be a whole lot of pain in the meantime, it just brings me down to the fundamental flaw in religion, which isn't just that it's non-scientific or that it's not falsifiable or any of these other issues. It's that most religions, if not all religions, plant themselves as being over any other type of contradiction. And so the conversations I have with him as he's sort of exploring his own identity and wanting to push back against the beliefs of me and his mother and these different things is to say that, you can believe whatever you want. Just make sure that you're not placing those beliefs over compassion.
Exactly.
That idea that the spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word is the one thing that I insist on in this house. And I hope that as people are reading this ruling, whether they identify as Catholic or not, that they're able to hold all of this in their minds while maintaining that sense that human beings come before whatever the hell is coming out of Rome.
No, well spoken. Arden, you had a moment or a point?
Not particularly. I feel like I might have, but that was a great rant, and I think that was put a bow on it.
Co-sign.
Yeah. Co-sign.
No,
exactly.
What he said. What he said.
Good. I'm glad we all agree. No, I absolutely right. And I wonder, and what made me think is like, what is the purpose with the Catholic religion, Christian, Muslim, anything, or Islamic, excuse me. I wonder if they are truly trying to hold on to LGBTQ members into their church that are still recognize themselves as believers because they're really, really worried about their salvation. I know with me being in church, I often have heard that. Even in smaller groups like Sunday school, where they would reference that a close family or their actual son or daughter. They're trying to keep them in the church and keep them going to, every, session of church throughout the whole damn week for whatever fucking reason. And they, are very adamant in saying, they're doing it out of love. They're doing it because they care about their salvation and blah, blah, blah. But the real point, and I kind of heard this little notion from one of my facilitators, is that the real point is that they're trying to not be as aggressive and pull them in with love and, nurture and care and demonstrate how they feel for them. But they're really just trying to say, we're trying to change you. We're trying to change you and push this book on you and push this rhetoric on you and teaching of God and the fear of damnation and all that, not only to keep our numbers up and recognize that, our religious population is still growing strong, but they're really just trying, it doesn't feel like a care about their salvation at all, if that's what the case is.
Yeah, it's hard to factor somebody else's motivation. Is it somebody's eternal soul, whatever that means? Is it just their tithe dollars or whatever else? But regardless, this is the decision that they're making. This is the choices that they're having, and it's to keep people coming back. There's a reason why Ebola has never reached pandemic status. It kills the host too quickly. If the rhetoric around homosexuality was getting too violent and homosexuality or gay visibility is increasing around the world, then the church has to adapt to that and they have to change some of that rhetoric. And so this is a pretty obvious attempt in my mind to stay relevant in a changing world and to just evolve that virus into something that can continue to find new hosts.
So and for me, it was always shocking to me with, like if Jena was about to put her hand on the stove, and it's an electric stove, and I know the burners are super hot, and I saw that she was about to put her hand, I would physically stop her. I would physically do something to get her body away from that. That's just a slight burn on the hand. It'll heal. This is my eternal soul. And you just let people walk away and, well, I guess they can do what they want to do. If they really cared about their loved ones' souls, there would be nothing that would be able to stop them from helping them or securing their salvation. But they don't I don't want to speak on what people actually believe and what they actually think. But if they were serious about what they thought, if they believed what they thought fully, to like literally, if they literally believed it, then there's no way they would act like this. This is a money grab. This is a cleanup. They're trying not to get canceled. They're trying to evolve into the we got to get in these 2020s. We've been sucking it up for the last 10 years. We got to figure out something. All right. Bring in the gays. No. Too hard. Just don't. Just say we don't love the sin of the gays. Okay, that's something, Larry. Larry, you're good at this meeting. I like you here. You deserve. You pull your chair closer to me. And it's this shell game of I love you so much that I'll let you hurt. That's not how love works.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how pain works. No one ever says,
control,
all right,
and instilling fear.
Yeah. I'm just gonna let the toddler stick the fork in the outlet. No. I love him so much, I'm gonna let him hurt himself. No, he'll die. That's bad. I don't want bad to happen. And that's what you do when you love people, is you don't let bad stuff happen to them if you can help it.
Mm-hmm. You're right about that. And and like you were saying in the beginning, Christy, like this is a non-story for most atheists. It's like, oh yeah, Catholics are against, same-sex marriage and gay people in general. Whoop-de-doo, right? But we have to recognize that, with some of these Catholic priests and representatives, they did want to push the motion of not just feeling disheartened of this news, but they recognize within their country or within their wherever they live, that certain groups, based on the laws of where they live, this is of some sort of protecting them. And maybe there's some genuineness to that. And I recognize that, and good on them for trying to affect that type of protection on them, if that's truly the case. And then I did have a quote here, a point that our very own Johnny P. Angel had mentioned in regards to this topic. Yes, even
I know
when
him.
he's here. He did say this, and I quote, "Catholics may seem more progressive now, but their beliefs are ancient. So this is to be expected, and it is their right to believe regressive things." And sure, that to a point, that is true. But in the favor of causing harm, in the favor of causing people to become more repressed and just for the long term, just feeling more lost, but still being kept within the circle, that's heavy.
No question.
Yeah. And, I know we'll hear more about it, and I know it'll be further discussed. Again, if I haven't already mentioned to you folks out there listening, links to everything that we're referencing are in the below description. There actually was a documentary, that was done. Not there was a bit of an interview of the Pope, which kind of, I guess you could say, misquoted him in his original statement, saying he's okay with same-sex unions and they should have certain rights and stuff like that. And so I guess the double down from the recent news was, oh no, JK. But there is a link to that documentary, or at least referencing it, so you can check that out yourself. Please do. It's quite interesting. But I want to move along to something even of a more heavier discussion. So let's just jump into our third segment, in which we call it as Shit and the Apologists Say.
Shit Internet Apologists Say.
So I'm just going to shut up. Arden, I want you to take the lead on this, because I know you had a lot of notes and things to say, and I just want to hear whatever you got to say. So please.
Sure. I mean, this is a good build off of what we were talking about. I think Walt Heyer is known in the trans community, a prominent detransitioner. So that is someone who was born agender, transitioned to another gender, and then transitioned back to the gender he was assigned at birth. And something that I think is, we've probably all heard of like ex-gay, really common in religious communities, when, people try to say like, I did have gay urges, but I want to live a godly life. I think this is a very tangential thing where often trans people who experience trauma and lack of acceptance due to their gender will kind of find themselves faced with one of two options, where they can continue being authentically themselves and live a life of a lot of pain, because it's difficult to be a trans person. And, I think in the time that Walt specifically transitioned, it was even more difficult than it is nowadays. It's rapidly progressing, but, even however long ago that was, it's even more difficult. I think it's interesting if we look at some of the ways that he phrased the reasons that he believes he transitioned. It's painful. I have a lot of empathy for, the emotional place that he's coming at this from. He was talking about reasons that people do this, and he says that could be sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or psychological abuse, but it caused us to not like who we are. And I think this is really interesting, because so if people don't know my story, I feel like I've told it a lot on ACA shows, so people are probably getting sick of it. But I myself actually transitioned around 14 and detransitioned at 17 and transitioned again at like 23. And when I was in the stage of detransitioning, trying to figure out what was it in me that caused me to think I was another gender, when it was going to be so hard, like what made me think that would ever be worth it? I wasn't maybe abused in as explicit as a way as it seems that Walt has been. But I definitely went through a lot of painful things from being forced into some regressive gender roles. And it did make me hate who I was. But what I think is interesting is it made me hate not being cis, it made me hate being trans. That's why I detransitioned. And I find it interesting that someone who claims to have realize that they were never trans and that they're actually cis, thinks that what they hated was their cisness. It seems like that's not, those things seem incompatible in some way. But, getting more into this, he starts talking about, through his work, and mind you, his work is stories that are reported to him from his website that is titled sexchangeregret.com. So we're talking about a very biased sample here. Says, through my work, people who are expressing discomfort or unhappiness with who they are, what I found is that 100% of the time they can pinpoint something that caused them to not like who they are. And
100%. Wow.
100%. That's quite a big claim. I can debunk that right now because I can tell you that
As
I'm
my friend Melty
transgender.
would say, what's the units on that?
Yeah, right.
Really?
Yeah, right.
It's worth pointing out that his entire scientific exploration and all of the science in this article boils down to his personal anecdotes, his cherry-picked case studies, and then a 16-year-old article in The Guardian, as all good science is, right?
Yeah,
yes.
right.
To be fair, he did spell it out in the article, per space cent. And I was like, oh, well, if it's on it per cent, so like for like per dollar, is that like 100th of a dollar? Is that how he's trying to? Because 100%. Oh, yeah. If it was 100%, the whole word, you're a liar. But if it's per cent, I don't know that I can fight that claim. Perhaps that is correct.
Just to dial back a little, just to dial back really quick, we're referencing this bullshit interview by the Christian Today website, no less, between Walt Heyer and someone interviewing him, in which he is addressing questions and relaying his experience through. I lose words because I know prior to the show we all expressed how heated we were about reading this. I apologize, Mikey, again, but it is difficult to read, but please read through that interview. It's just profound. But Arden, please continue.
So the way I wanted to go next is to talk about some research that I brought up. And mind you, this is like a minuscule fraction of the research that I could address on this topic. I wanted to keep this as concise as possible. Before I do that, I do want to say quickly that for those people who do feel that detransition is the best option for them, there aren't, honestly, a lot of resources out there for them to know how to address that issue and how to go about living a fulfilling life. And they definitely deserve empathy and respect. With that said, one of the first studies that I think is really fascinating, it's a study from 2015. The sampling method is maybe questionable. It was an online survey, but it sampled almost 28,000 people. So I think there's a lot of generalizability that can be made from this study. So of people who detransitioned in this group, all the people who took the survey were identified as trans. I know what I'm missing. That's unfortunate. I should have found this. The percentage of those that detransitioned, I don't actually have that number. But what I do have is that 60 some odd % of those people ended up retransitioning later in life. And the reason they detransitioned is, like we were saying earlier, due to lack of acceptance in their society, in their workplace, in their school, in their home. And only of this study, only 0.4% of the representative population who detransitioned cited regret as the reason. Another study that I found on the topic, I wanted to see if I could get some ranges on the percent of regret to make sure we're honestly representing this. The highest regret rate that I could find for medical transition, was 2.2%. And, I think his whole platform is that people who go through medical transition, almost all of them regret it, is the notion that he wants you to come away with, and that it's a miserable, traumatic thing. There's a lot of medical procedures that are widely accepted that have a regret rate far higher, higher than 2.2%.
Absolutely.
If we're going to call healthcare that has this level of regret rate not medically sound, we're going to have to get rid of a lot of the things that we consider just standard procedures for different, illnesses and ailments nowadays. Another thing I think I wanted to mention was that, gender affirming care, healthcare, and social care are demonstrably one of the best things for kids. One of the best practices that we currently have to address kids who are feeling like they don't identify with the gender they were assigned at birth. In one of these studies, the presence of depressive symptoms was related to whether the trans youth had supportive parents who were supportive of their gender identity and expression. It says a clear difference emerged with depressive symptoms reported only by 23% of those who had supportive parents, in contrast with 75% of those who were not strongly supportive. So just having parents who say, I hear you, I love you, you're great. And, whatever happens, whether you regret this or whether this is the right decision for you, I'm here for you. That reduces depressive symptoms by an astronomical degree.
Yeah, that alone is enough.
Yeah.
It can be in most cases. Mm-hmm.
This is the whole notion that is pushed here. And this is also, by the way, the reasoning that is behind the legislation that is in countless states right now that is trying to ban gender affirming care for trans youth. Mm-hmm. Arkansas and Alabama have passed laws through their state Senate that I don't know about Arkansas's penalty, but I know Alabama seeks to make it a Class C felony for doctors or parents who approve of gender affirming care for their youth, which is absurd. How can we say, healthcare that has this level of success is worthy of a Class C felony? This is pure propaganda that is being sold to our politicians, and it's especially on Trans Day of Remembrance. I think or Trans Day of Visibility. Sorry, wrong holiday. It's just really important to be aware of the amount of anti-trans propaganda that is gripping our country right now, and it's gripping a lot of major first world countries around the world.
Yeah, and we see the rhetoric, and recently with the Equality Act that was passed in the House and just, fiddling its thumbs in the Senate, where, a lot of those representatives, on the Republican side, obviously, were so adamant and voiceful about, your son or daughter should accept who they are, and God doesn't make mistakes, and bullshit after that. And to go so far as to some of those representatives who do have trans children to be ostracized and have various things posted on their office door, touting them and expressing that, they should follow whatever God has deemed them to be and all this other stuff. It's crazy. So even at the highest level of our country and our community, when you see that, it just, as we have been discussing, furthering the regressiveness of people that deserve respect and care and rights just like anyone else. It's just pushing religious rhetoric. That's all that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that force, that pressure is such an important part of what we're talking about here. Arden, you pulled out a couple of statistics, and you kind of mentioned that most, or at least a lot of the pressure to detransition is because of the social punishment for being out as trans. Arden, last time that you were on Secular Sexuality, you presented the audience with a version of the miracle question. This idea of if you could take a pill and wake up tomorrow, or if a magician could flick his wand and you could all of a sudden wake up in the body that you prefer, but everything else in your life stays the same. Everybody treats you the same way, your relationships all the same way. Would you want to do it? And that question is something that I use in my practice all the time when I am working with folks who are maybe questioning their gender or who are considering transition or things like that. And each and every single time that I have had a conversation in which somebody who has been taking hormones or has publicly transitioned, but is perhaps wanting to pump the brakes, to maybe slow down, to change their dosage or anything along those lines, the answer invariably is because of outside social pressures. I mean, I had 2 of those conversations just this week. I sincerely mean that. 2 this week. I know that that's not a scientific study, but I'm seeing this in my office every day. And so for him to pretend not to know that just feels incredibly dishonest to me. At one point in the interview, he makes a comparison to conversion therapy, and he makes the claim that that conversion therapy is like this demon that people bring up, and that it's not really happening. He makes the claim that he's spoken to literally thousands of formerly trans-identified people, or however we want to talk about these folks. He says that he's talked to literally thousands of them who have never, and not one person has ever experienced conversion therapy. And I have to call bullshit on that.
Mm-hmm.
I am not 80. I have not been doing I don't want to say doing what he does, because I very much do the opposite of the type of work that he does in a lot of ways. But I've only been working as a practicing therapist for around about 5 years. And in that time, I've spoken to dozens of people who have experienced some version of conversion therapy. And we don't call it that necessarily, because that terminology is obviously very heated, but certainly it's something that exists. And so for him to say that he's never heard of it feels like a very no true Scotsman type of fallacy, where he's like, well, if they didn't use the term conversion therapy, it must not happen. It is happening, and it is hurting people, and we have science to show that.
Right. Another thing that caught me in the interview too was him mentioning not only his blatant disregard and misunderstanding of gender dysphoria, but the actual notion that a person that denies their sex at birth is only performing their own act of self-destruction. It's self-destructive when you deny a person their right to recognize the gender that they recognize, and in this basing it on the pure fact that, oh, you were deemed this by birth by some doctor, or excuse me, by God, that you just have to conform to that. You don't know the type of psychological damage that can occur. And it's just like, what bullshit statistics are you pulling this from? Oh, I forgot, it's the Bible.
Well, and that brings me to my main point on this story that I'll try to rush through as much as I can. But I want to recognize that this personal interview from this therapist, I hate using that
Christian
term.
Today.
Yeah. Well, no, I meant the person they were interviewing. But in any case, Walt Heyer, however we describe him, was subjected to incredible abuse.
Yeah.
He himself was horribly, horribly harmed. And it makes a certain kind of sense. And I can have a little bit of compassion for the fact that he has been really damaged, and that he had a really unique experience in which he was sort of forced into a trans identity that he later realized didn't suit him, and is now working to help save people from that same type of experience. And there's validity to that. There's a lot about his methods that is absolute bullshit and absolutely awful. But in hearing his story, it made me think about a case study that I experienced in university. This story of a so-called feral child named Jeannie. The idea here, and it was presented to students as this question of this poor girl who had been so thoroughly isolated for the first 14 years of her life that she never really developed the ability to speak. Right. And doctors and scientists come in and they find this absolutely fascinating. They're never able to teach her how to speak. And at the time, Noam Chomsky had just published all of this research on the language acquisition device and was using this as a case study to understand how we develop language. And as a student, I was fascinated by this idea. You know, we have this opportunity, this bizarre case study to sort of isolate a piece of what makes us human. And I thought that was so interesting. And you could possibly see Walt's story here as something very similar of, okay, maybe we can begin to understand where gender comes from. And is it nature? Is it nurture? And all of these different pieces. But in studying the story of Jeannie and becoming fascinated with it, and reading every article I could and watching every documentary, it became very clear that this is not the story that we were presented with. This is not, oh, there are like these foundational moments in your life where you're meant to develop certain aspects of your personality. Instead, that was the story of one poor girl being terribly, terribly abused. And that's really the lens that I have to see Walt Heyer's story through. His experience was not one of his gender being confused by these forces for transgenderism. This was the case of a young child being molested and hurt and damaged in that way. And now, as an adult, grappling with understanding it. And even if we can find a little bit of kindness and compassion for him, the conclusions that he's drawn and the damage that he has done to thousands of people around the world is absolutely heartbreaking and in many ways, in my eyes, very unforgivable.
I didn't want to say, yeah, but fuck that guy. But yeah, but fuck that guy. Like, I get it. I totally understand Arden and Christy's point, and Jen as well. I understand that. But me, as a black man in this country, I hate a lot of this, and it like brings up this boiling rage inside me, because this is literal objectifying of people. When you talk about trans people, like, well, I was this and and now I'm this, so now you don't know shit. You don't know shit. None of these people out here are your test subjects. No one, you don't know anything. You know nothing. If you think you understand people, then you actually know nothing about anything. You don't know what's going on with them. So don't sit here and pretend that just because Christian Today just chose to do, and the way that they asked the questions was also ridiculous.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He couldn't have written them better himself. But I hate to hear, like, it's just instinctual for me. I hate it when I hear people talk about other groups of people like things. And there was so much of that just like interwoven in how he talked. And I'm just like, dude, fuck you, man. Like, you don't fucking know anyone else's story. And I know that all 100% of the people that you talked to did not all have the same story. They did not. And as soon as you start to objectify people and you start removing their autonomy, you turn them into something that my people were turned into, and that's animals. That's cattle. That's chattel. And you don't do that to human beings, ever.
To borrow a word, amen.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with saying fuck Walt Heyer. Like, I'll co-sign that with you.
In your face, Walt.
No, I think that's so true. You know, and that's kind of what I was getting at with the whole, like, talking about how this impacts, like, the legislation and stuff. Because, you know, if people, I'm sure most people have seen the, like, viral video of Rand Paul interrogating Rachel Levine, who has now been confirmed, I believe, for her position as the second Assistant Secretary of Health, I believe. You know, saying, this is like genital reassignment surgery, calling it mutilation, saying that, you know, young girls are lopping off healthy breasts, you know, saying that just these absurd comparisons with these procedures that have been, you know, done and refined into like good medical practice that can demonstrably improve the quality of life of these individuals. Not to mention, this is targeting kids. People don't even understand the amount of hoops that a minor has to go through to access that kind of medical care. It's hard enough as an adult trans person to access good medical care. Minors have 10 more hoops to jump through. So the fact that we are going to take away, like, I think this is a great image that I want to leave people with on this. For these policies, imagine a young trans girl, right? She was lucky enough to understand her gender. She has a supportive family. She gets access to medical treatment and goes to a new high school where nobody knows she's trans, because being trans is hard, especially in high school. She's in Arkansas. She doesn't get her medicine anymore. She's going to start going through like male puberty. So she has, at that point, no autonomy over her life. She should be the one who gets to decide who knows who she is and who gets that information. That is her medical history. And that opportunity was ripped away by people who spread propaganda like Walt and like Rand Paul and like all of these politicians who are pushing these laws. It is demonstrably going to harm trans youth, and it has a very good chance of costing someone their life. And like, I really hate to use the blood on their hands analogy, because I think it can sometimes be thrown around a little loosely, but in this circumstance, I think it can pretty squarely be put on, the blame of these politicians and people like Walt, who are spreading this absolute propaganda that they will have blood on their hands for this. And
You're right.
it breaks my heart.
Yeah,
And I
a
don't
lot.
want to, want to like drag this out any longer because I know we have more stuff to get to. But that's what drove me out of religion, was not respecting people as people.
Sure.
Mhm.
That's when I knew I had to go, because when people can't be people anymore, then I have nothing to do with it. I'm washing my hands of this whole thing, and I'm gonna do everything I can to gum up the works for you, so you can't do it to more people, so you can't harm more people. And it is very convenient that Christian Today decided that this was the perfect person to have on to have just a little chat about the trans issue. Okay.
Trans issue.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
excellent.
Yeah.
No, very spot on for them. And you're right, Arden. Yes, that term is used very loosely, but I mean, how can you look at it any other way? Especially within the last year or so, or a few years, I should say, with the violence against trans individuals, and how just trying to just pass this legislation in February through the House with the Equality Act, and we know where it's going to sit and stand in the Senate. That's just going to carry on for Lord knows how long. But like all of you said, I mean, what are the words to really express like just why, with this such aggressive effort to just cause more harm to a group of people? It's been done to currently Asian Americans. And then, a tidbit on that, just because we just referenced an article stemming from China, we recognize, the violence that's going on against that group of people as well. And just stop, just fucking stop. That it seems to be this sudden trend when something epic happens. Same thing with 9/11, violence against Islamic religion recognizing people, Muslims. Same thing with, stemming off with this pandemic. Now there's violence against all Asians, thinking that all Asians are fucking from China, which is not the fucking case. Just grappling with this hate and just people just acting out of their damn minds just to impose this type of harm against others. It's, I don't understand I don't understand or get the point of hate and violence against others, just because I don't know if it stems from without some sort of fear or what have you. And if it's by your religious book, fine, but keep that shit to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. And just bridging off of just trans visibility day to day, since like I mentioned, we're recording on March 31st, since this is airing on Sunday. Let's just first take a breather, look for some positivity, because there's obviously some positive with recognizing and why this day is so important, to have, as it says of the day, the speaking, putting out there and speaking about the visibility and importance and the strife that trans people are putting forth in our community, and how speaking about it will continue to help normalize it, just like we try to strive for positive atheism, normalizing that. It's the same thing, and it bridges the same issues, and it's all encompassing for the many different intersectionalities that stems from if a person is trans and identifies as African American, and if they're women or a woman, and various other things. And so we are going to provide some links that are based out of UK and also the US, of supportive organizations and charities that you can, of course, lend your support to. But let's be a little positive and discuss just all the good that comes with recognizing this day. I know with the history of it, it's only been around just a short decade, or not even that, 6-7 years. And given with the pandemic, how we're able to connect and gain support for this. I know a lot of what they're doing as far as the conference going on today had to be virtual. But I think it's very important that we try to speak the names of those that we have lost in the trans community and speak the names of those that are present with us, that are striving for more progressiveness, not just in America, but across our country, or excuse me, across our world.
Yeah. This holiday is a bit of a struggle for me because Trans Day of Visibility is meant to be a more positive holiday in contrast to a Trans Day of Remembrance, where we really do focus on a little more deeply on the lives of those that we have lost due to violence in the trans community. But, to be a visible trans person in a patriarchal society like we have is already a radical act. And it's hard to, like, I am very privileged that I assimilate enough into general society that I am able to be visibly trans out there and talking about my transness. I would love to not have to talk about my transness and to just live a normal life, but that is not the world we live in, unfortunately. And I am also, unfortunately, an argumentative enough person that I have taken up the mantle of ringing these bells all the time, and it's something that I am happy to do because I really care about the lives of young trans people and the trans people who are less fortunate than me. Man, I really care about, when you're trans, it's hard to have a sense of self-worth. Society constantly is trying to make you question who you are and whether or not you belong in the broader society. So the main message I want trans people to hear is that, like, you are deserving of love and belonging and of joy and peace. And that's just by virtue of you existing. This is not something that you have to earn or that you have to prove to cis people. You don't have to meet their standard of how you should be. You exist and you aren't harming anyone by existing. And because of that, you deserve all those things.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you highlighting the, I don't know if bittersweet is the right word, but just the challenge of this holiday. On secular sexuality, we made the executive decision a few years ago to not mark National Coming Out Day. And we tend to sort of avoid some of these types of holidays. And I don't know entirely about that decision. I think that there's a lot of back and forth, but we felt at least somewhat uncomfortable with the idea that this is a burden in many ways that is placed specifically and often in many ways exclusively on queer folks. And I just don't like the idea that queer children are expected to come out or that they owe that to people in a way that cis children don't. On the other hand, I do want to acknowledge that this is meant to be, and hopefully someday in many ways will be, more of a celebration, more of a point of pride. The original Pride Parade was Stonewall. Stonewall was a riot, and that's an important idea to remember. For right now, I struggle with the challenges that this brings, the burden that this can place on a lot of people. But I hope that fight, that effort, that willingness to be out there snowballs, and that we can continue to get to a place where we're able to have parades, where giant corporate sponsors are able to come in and try and co-opt the messaging. I mean, even now, like, there's so much. It's such a mixed bag in so many ways. But at least we've gotten to a point with homosexuality or queer culture writ large that it is now a capitalistic ideal to lean into queer audiences. And I hope that Trans Day of Visibility can be a force for good. But I do want to ask, folks watching who are cis to be mindful of the burden that they place on trans folks by pushing for that sense of pride, and then to trans folks watching to say that we love you and we see you and we are excited for you when you're able to show your colors, and I hope we are compassionate towards you when that's not a safe option, when that's not something you feel comfortable doing.
This Trans Day Parade brought to you by our friends at, and then you can name big corporation.
There you go.
One thing I stole from the article was anything you can quote, anything you can do. Oh, another thing I can read, I promise. Another thing you can do is commit to being a better ally to trans and non-binary people, end quote. And that's my role in this crazy world. Normalizing and celebrating my trans peeps is just as important as defending my own peeps. And with our last 4 years behind us, no minority group can rule anyone else out as an ally. We saw that there's a lot of not great people out there ready and willing to join and lock arms to stifle and snuff out groups that they don't like. Well, they got backup now. So what's good? Like, you want to take all of us out? Because you ain't taking all of us out. Because there's a whole bunch of us out here. So, man, I mean,
well, I hope that that's a call to action, particularly for the atheist community, to remember that religious bigotry is a huge part of the trans experience. And if you are watching one of the ACA shows, you're in this fight.
Yep.
Welcome to the
you
team.
Certainly are.
Yeah. I think it was just a couple weeks ago, Katie Montgomery, a friend of mine, was on AXP, and trans topics came up twice during the show. And I don't know if y'all were in the live chat, but the religious bigotry, maybe the viewers of AXP are no longer considering themselves religious, but holy shit, they did not let go of that religious bigotry. They were so angry to hear that maybe a trans woman doesn't deserve to have this stereotype of this hulking bearded man projected onto her, in sports or anywhere. They were so viscerally taken aback by that. And I think I have found a home in the atheist community. I don't want to give off the image that that is maybe necessarily the majority or anything like that, but it is definitely not an unspoken sentiment in the community. And, part of being visible is making people uncomfortable. So if that, episode of AXP, or if this episode here talking about how dire trans people have it in America right now makes you uncomfortable, good. I fucking hope so. Because we've been dealing with a lot more than discomfort for a long fucking time. And if that's what you experience to get you caring about this, then I'm not sorry.
No.
If I can steal a line, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
If I can steal a line from Jon Stewart, like on one of his last few shows before he handed over to Trevor Noah, and he was talking about Black Lives Matter. He's like, if you think it's annoying to hear about it all the time, just imagine how impossible it is to live it every day. Or something to that effect. So if you're sick of hearing about how trans people have it so bad, blah, 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 I'm so sick of hearing this, try being trans for an hour. Be trans for an hour and go to the grocery store. Now you see my point, and now you can shut up.
Right.
Please and thank
you. And the notion that we push to say, if you only took a moment to walk into their shoes and understand what they're going through, by all means, I get that no one can truly understand what they have never experienced or what they have never identified for themselves. So the best thing, or the best advice that I can convey, is just shut the fuck up and listen. Listen to what trans people, African Americans, other marginalized groups have to say, because there is a fucking point that these voices are becoming louder and louder, and they need to be, in order for you to feel just as uncomfortable enough to be like, hey, this is hateful. This does hurt other people that are not me. It's that easy to just take that step back, sit down, shut up, open your ears, actually effectively listen to these people, and just, no one would ever truly understand what they've never actually stepped into. But the best you can do is understand what pain and hurt and detriment it has caused to a person. I think that's the best thing anyone can do. And I know as for me, when I was battling with me coming, deconverting from Christianity, I struggled back and forth from all that, and now recognize myself, albeit closeted, but as an atheist, the hard-hitting rhetoric and talk that you hear constantly. And what pushed me over the top one day was indeed actually a conversation I sat into in my Sunday school class regarding gay rights and people not understanding what a transgender person was, and saying, how do you not recognize, or how does one not know if they feel more girl or more boy? Like, if you have this genitalia, then obviously you're that. That just, it took me aback. And at that point in my life, I did not fully understand what it meant to be a transgender person, but that on its head just had this bad thought and taste in my mouth where it just shook me to the point where, how can a religion pose as being so loving and welcoming, but put out this type of hate speech where they don't even recognize what that truly means to a person that's not them? And to add to that, actually, to say that in the same vein, to say, the struggle of Black people is not the same as the struggle of gay rights and trans rights and any other group. Like, we're just so special and different that, oh yeah, Black people need more better rights, but no, that side is a little different. Like, that's different. They're not the same as us. Bullshit. The fight's still the same.
Yeah, I actually kind of wanted to build off of what you said earlier too, Mikey. That's a really great point. The book Transgender History by Susan Stryker is a fantastic book, and I'm pretty sure that's the right book. I've read a lot of books, so I could be referencing the wrong one. I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure in that one she talks about how Black culture and trans culture have been very intertwined. If you're going back to like the 70s and 80s, like ballroom culture, especially in like major cities, was packed with people of color. Trans people who were out were pushed to the same communities that people of color have been in, and they were put in the same scenarios. Now, I'm coming from, the later age. I have a good family, so they were very well off. So I didn't have to face the things that those people did. But that's the history of these groups. Like, our oppression is very deeply intertwined. And so our fight against that oppression should be just as intertwined. Like you're saying earlier, Mikey, we can do so much when we work together. We can have each other's backs, and we can get so much further. And I think, that goes for every minority group in this country. I would like to see more of that.
Which is part of why it's heartbreaking to see struggles towards trans acceptance within the atheist community. And it's still very much a part of our community. I mean, the atheist community of Austin has stumbled on this subject in the past. And so I guess I just want to implore anybody watching who is perhaps still struggling with these ideas to remember that if you found the ACA after leaving religion, that you are allowed then to continue to grow and develop. You can get better. You can learn more about this stuff. And if you still have it in your head that trans folks are confused or leaning into some bullshit science, I promise you, you cannot disprove the existence of trans folks in any sort of scientific or skeptical fashion. Try, make a concerted effort, use sincere and honest methods. And when you realize you can't, know that we're glad that you figured it out. We're glad that you're ready to join us, that you can make apologies for your past, and we can all move on from it together.
Yeah.
Well, to defend those people you just spoke on, Christy, it's impossible to find someone who is transgender to talk to. It's so hard, especially on the internet and on Twitter. There's no way to ever get into a conversation with someone who's trans. So how would you, oh wait, Arden, is it super hard for people to have a conversation with you about how to be a good ally? Is it hard for them to? Is it difficult? Do they have to like learn a new language? Do y'all have y'all own language that they have to learn, or do y'all just speak the common tongue?
Yeah, actually,
That's it.
it's really hard because, I have my DMs open on Twitter, but that's still like 3 clicks. So that's like that's a lot of effort.
That's a lot of effort.
That's
a lot.
300% of clicks that I just can't afford. That's just too steep of a hill to climb. So if you have any questions about trans people, why don't you ask them? Don't just hold on to your bigoted thoughts. Yeah, Krista brings up a great point. Do your research. Try to falsify it, but also talk to them. Just talk to them. Stop treating them like the other and talk to them. This is easy.
Yeah.
If you can find trans voices in your porn, and we know you are,
Oh,
you
yeah.
can find trans voices in other fashions to actually speak about these substantive issues.
Oh, yeah, they're watching.
Yeah, and on that note, if you want to try and find trans voices in your porn, tune in to every Thursday, for Secular Sexuality. Maybe Christy will give it a mention.
I got some websites I can recommend. I don't know.
There you go. Oh my gosh. Thank you, all 3 of you. I appreciate this discussion. A lot of heavy stuff, but it is warranted that, in light and in the presence of this holiday, Trans Visibility Day, it needs to be talked about. And I appreciate you, Christy, Arden, and Mikey, for joining me this afternoon. To you folks out there listening to us live, thank you so much for tuning in. Please, if at all possible, support us. Continue to follow us every Sunday as we broadcast. Please, if you can, support us at patreon.com, link down below, /the nonprofits. Everything we've referenced today is in our description. I'm breathing heavy because this was a topic that I was personally excited about, something I just wanted to sit back and learn myself. I recognize I am a talker, both physically and verbally. So I appreciate all of your viewpoints. Please, Christy, in the future, join us again. Arden, Mikey, thank you for being here with me again. Join us in a conversation further in our fan-based Discord at tiny.cc/ACA Discord. And also, you can subscribe to this channel and follow us in our Facebook fan group, facebook.com/group/the nonprofits live. Until then, we'll see you guys next week.